Hello, everyone out there in internet land, all the people at home, all the people at work, all the people in their cars, all the other humans doing human things. Today is November 16th. It's a Friday. 2016. What a jackass. It's 2018. We live in 2018. I should know that. Unfortunately, in 2018, on approximately November 12th, we lost Stan Lee. As the godfather of Marvel Comics, he was very influential on me. I have a couple personal stories to tell about him on today's episode. In the wrestling arena, is it an arena? I don't know. In the wrestling segment, we'll call it a segment. In the wrestling segment, we're going to talk about a game on the Nintendo 64. A game I've spent countless hours playing. Because sometimes it's fun to go old school. So you better get ready. Because this is Not Life with Adam S. Messinger.
If you're reading Saga or crying from the Muir, he'll deliver a sunset flip, so hold secure. He's got comic books and wrestling all night. This is Not Life with Adam Messinger. Adam S. Messinger.
Welcome to episode 43. I am, as you guessed it, as you've deduced, because you're smart, Adam S. Messinger. Stan Lee passed away on November 11th, 2018. It's weird to be in a world without Stan. He was 95, and he just seemed like he was going to live forever. As I was younger, I didn't really read a whole lot of Stan Lee comics, but I was very big into Marvel. The first comic I did buy on my own, the first series I chose to buy on my own, was the Heroes Reborn stuff from 1996, and you had Captain America, and the Avengers, and Iron Man, and the Fantastic Four all reimagined for the first time. And so I decided they're starting over. It's time for me to jump in. And I followed those for about 12 issues. Till their end. And all the cartoons I watched as a kid were Marvel cartoons. Except for, of course, Batman the Animated Series. As a kid, they had these videotapes I'd go rent at the local video store or the library or whatever, and they were all themed around different characters. You had Magneto and Green Goblin and Spider-Man and the X-Men. Of course, they used part of the X-Men for that one. You had Captain America and the Red Skull. They all had these fancy cases. Not the cardboard cases, but the plastic ones that had the little seal inside of it. And I would rent those from the library to the point where my parents would just look at me and be like, "You want to get this again?" And I loved them. I loved the fuck out of them. I would get any type of action figure that was out there. I remember as a kid trying to collect the entirety of, well, I didn't try, I did collect the entirety of the first wave of X-Men figures. And the first cartoon I remember watching was Pride of the X-Men. And the figures were pretty much from that line. But that cartoon starts out with Stan Lee's voice. So I knew Stan Lee right about the time I knew all the Marvel stuff. And as a kid, I collected the cards. And a kid that went to my church, he had some of the cards I was looking for out of the card set, and he had doubles of everything. Well, not of everything, but a lot of things. And he said, you can have as many of these doubles as you want. He was like, the only card you can't have, though, is my Stan Lee card. And it looked fucking cool, because the way they drew Stan Lee on this card was he had all kinds of... He was like an amalgamation of all the heroes. He looked fucking awesome. As I got older, I kind of learned about how Stan Lee was not necessarily the best collaborator, not giving credit where credit is due necessarily. And that shifted into my image of Stan Lee as I became a teenager to late teens. And then it hit me by the time I was around 18, 19, I hadn't read any of the original Marvel stuff. I'd read a lot of things at that point. I'd read the Max, I'd read, all the Image stuff. At that time, I was keeping up with all the monthly Marvel and DC stuff. But I'd not read where it all came from. So I sat down with a copy of Amazing Spider-Man Masterworks Volume 1 and loved it. I loved how he wrote. I loved the prose he used. He was very much to me like a novel writer who came in and blended that with comics. He truly blended the words and the pictures. Nowadays, it's a lot more complex, especially with the storylines they tell and the overall story arcs. But back then, it was just as simple as trying to fuse a novel with pictures. And Stan Lee really perfected that. When it was good, but there were some of those I remember reading that were awful. I read pretty much the entire run of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby on X-Men, and that shit was terrible. But that was usually the exception and not the rule. I loved the Captain America stuff that he wrote when Cap came back from being frozen at a time. Of course, Spider-Man was great. I loved the first bit of Fantastic Four. I read the first 2 issues. I haven't really read much past that, simply because I love them so much, and I wish that they had not become superheroes. Don't get me wrong, I love my fair share of Fantastic Four comics now. But seeing what Jack and Stan originally came up with versus what they have now is totally different. Having that appreciation, I remember thinking, it'd be cool to meet him one day. And then I was at a comic shop that I frequented, and a couple of people who were friends of the owner came in and said, hey, we're going to meet Stan Lee at a shop in the Bay Area. Do you want us to get anything signed for you? It's $30 a signature. And my head at that time nearly exploded. I was like, who the fuck is charging for their signature? What asshole's just like, yeah, give me $30 and I'll sign your shit? I was like, I get he's Stan Lee, but that's fucking out of control. I'm drawing a moral line. And I held that position for a while, and then I saw his signature shoot up to $50. And then I saw it shoot up to $80. And then I saw it shoot up to $100 at various appearances throughout the years. And it was about 3 or 4 years ago, I was with my friend, the same guy actually, and I said, Stan Lee's going to be in San Jose at Silicon Valley Comic Con. He's getting up there in years. I know it's $100 a signature, but we should really take this opportunity and either get something signed or take a picture or something. And he agreed. So we went up on the Sunday of the first Silicon Valley Comic Con. And we waited in line for probably a good hour. Maybe longer, because he was late. And in my collecting, the only thing of Stan Lee's that I collected regularly when I actually began collecting in around 2001 was Stan Lee's Just Imagine Stan Lee creating the DC Universe. And they'd put out an omnibus of this stuff, so I took that to get signed. My friend had a copy of either Daredevil 48 or 49. It was Daredevil in a boxing ring versus Captain America. And that was what he chose to get signed. He even sent it off to CGC that same day, and I bought a certificate of authenticity from Stan Lee's people for $20. He ended up paying the extra, 100 or so to get a picture with him. And it's so funny because his picture has a shirt that says Stan Lee is my superhero. He told me, he goes, Stan didn't even know who he was taking pictures with. He just stood there. Well, he sat there, and then we came up one by one, and he didn't really look at us. He just looked at the camera and smiled. When I got to meet him and get my book signed, they'd said ahead of time, like, hey, you can give Stan a fist bump. You can't really have a big conversation with him because, of course, the line. No pictures and all that. So, I got there and I told him thank you, and I fist bumped him. And he just looked at me and he kind of chuckled and he said, "You're welcome." And I thought, well, that's it. That's my time with Stan Lee. And I internally fanboyed out. I was really excited. As somebody who had wanted to write comics for most of his life, Stan Lee was a big influence on me in the way he wrote. I loved his dialogue, as I said earlier. And in a couple of things I wrote, I tried to emulate that. I didn't do a very good job, but I tried. At this same Comic Con, there was a big row of comic art on display, original art for stuff. And it was fairly clear of people in that area, and I just went through the different the different glass displays. There was, I think, 5 or 6 rows, something like that. So I'm sitting there and I squat on my knees and I'm looking into the glass without basically pressing my face against it, looking at the different artists and who did what, because for the most part, I don't think they were credited. They just had the art pieces on display. So I would look to see what artist did what if I didn't know who it was. And there were a couple people next to me, and I see them just rapidly back up. And not only that, I see the people I was on the edge, and the people away from me, away from the display, started to back up as well. So I started to get up, and I looked behind me, and there's about 2 inches away from me, Stan Lee. And I almost fell on my ass and almost took him with me on accident. But there were people behind us who had all lined up to take pictures and photographs and all that of him just walking through this area. And he looked like he was 20 foot tall to me. Just even, from where I was. And as I walked out, or as he walked out, he was probably a good 6 foot, 6'1" maybe. He was tall. He was taller than me. And he moved without any real problem, it looked like. That was impressive, because at that time he was still in his 90s and he just looked... I've seen people in their 60s and 70s not move nearly as well as he did. That was a fun time. And I thought maybe, you know what, if his health kicks back, because at the time, his last signing in San Jose, he had pneumonia, and they just drug him out when he should have been at home. I thought, if his health kicks back, I might go and try to have something else signed by him at another signing. And then as it looked like his health wasn't as good, I was like, you know what, Stan should just be left alone and to be able to enjoy his last days doing whatever he wants. And he can just stay out of the comic convention scene area. And it seems like the last year after his wife passed away, that was kind of what he was able to do, but his health took a downturn very fast. If you're really looking for some good Stan Lee comics and you want to celebrate the man's work and enjoy what he did, for me personally, I would say my top favorite Stan Lee comic is, just imagine Stan Lee creating the Sandman with Walter Simonson. It's a one-shot. It's extremely good. In my opinion, it has, of course, as it says, it reinvents the whole concept of the Sandman. And there's a guy who ends up getting a bracelet that allows him to travel to a different world when he sleeps, and he becomes the warrior of this world, and he can travel, and then once he gets the bracelet, it allows him to travel between the two worlds. And then the worlds start to converge due to this evil bad guy that he confronts and stops. The art in it's fantastic. It's Walt Simonson, and I love Walt Simonson. So I'd recommend that. The other thing I'd recommend is The Last Fantastic Four story by Stan Lee and John Romita Jr. It's a lot of fun. It's the Fantastic Four trying to stop a being who, with the power of thought, can do anything. And this being and from his people have decided that Earth sucks, and they have a week before it's going to be wiped out of the universal real estate. And you see the different people in the Marvel Universe try to stop this being, and this being just thinks, and they're fucking gone. And eventually the Fantastic Four find out who... Well, they send the Silver Surfer out to find out who they are, how we can stop it, all that stuff. And so it turns out that this group of people that run on instinct and are just warmongers are sent after them. And the Fantastic Four says just because they wanted to wipe us out and they thought that we weren't a good species doesn't mean we should let them die, because there was no morality there on their part. They weren't being malicious, even though they were trying to wipe us out and they thought that we weren't contributing. So let's go save them. And so the Fantastic Four go and they stop this group from wiping out the people that run things by thought. And that is what saves Earth. That was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that story. And then the last thing I'll recommend is Stan Lee's Silver Surfer stuff with John Buscema. All that stuff, the entire series I felt like was really good. So there you have it. That's kind of my thoughts on all the Stan Lee stuff. I'm going to miss him. I think we all will. As I said, I know he's not perfect. He didn't run things the best that he could have. But he did excellent stuff. And what he did do, he was very good at. I live in Stockton, and the Fantastic Four have the keys. Well, they had their ship crash land here. That was due to Joe Field from Flying Color Comics out in Concord, fighting for that and trying to get that established in continuity. They had Stan Lee get the keys to the city after he accepted, and him and Jim Shooter wrote Fantastic Four 290. Was it 290 or 292? It was one of those. And if you go to a local establishment, Al's Comics, which has been around since, Frank Miller's initial run on Daredevil, they have a picture there of Stan Lee hanging out in the shop. And I guess a guy that had dressed up as Spider-Man came and spent time there too. So not only has he touched me personally, he's touched my town. Excelsior, y'all. This is not life, listeners. You're sitting in your homes, you're sitting in your car, you're sitting in your whatever part of life, and you're listening to me, and you're saying to yourself, this podcast is so good. Why can't we get more? This fool started out doing 3 times a week. Now he's doing once a week, if that, and he's not consistent. But let me tell you, I'm working on trying to make that happen. In fact, I'm proud to announce my new podcast, The Silent Hour, with Adam S. Messinger. You can join me for an hour where I say nothing. I do nothing, but I sit and think. I have thoughts in my head. They're swirling for a whole hour, and you can have that too. Just check out all my podcast network stuffs. That's all my podcast network stuffs.net to keep updated on this and when it's coming. That's right, The Silent Hour with me, Adam S. Messinger, at allmystuffs.net. It'll be an hour, an extra hour in your week that you will not be able to miss. Normally, in this wrestling segment, this takes up more of the time. It's what I yammer about the most. I'll talk about what's been happening on WWE, but I've kind of taken a hiatus on that. With the whole Crown Jewel bullshit, I've kind of been watching other stuff. But WWE throughout the years have provided us some great video games. In fact, I spent many hours on the video game I'm reviewing today in my room as a teenager, even in my early 20s. Playing this, and that's WWF WrestleMania 2000. I have so much fun with this game. It came out in the year 1999, right before WrestleMania 2000 itself, and this game was made by THQ and developed by the Aki Corporation, AKI. I don't know how you say it. In that time, right before it came out, you had WCW NWO Revenge making a big wave in the gaming world. A game I owned, I spent many hours on. And the unthinkable happened when THQ picked up the WWF license instead of WCW. This is a very accurate snapshot of the roster at the time. You had a lot of all the gameplay from WCW NWO Revenge stayed, and then they added some onto it. There were a lot of nuances in it. The game revolved around a grapple system that was very satisfying. You had an easy way to do short grapples and strong grapples, and it had a momentum meter that really balanced the direction of the match and how each member was faring in it. While of course it's not as complex as No Mercy was, with WWF No Mercy being the pinnacle of wrestling gaming, which to this day is maybe rivaled by one or two other games. WWF WrestleMania 2000, I think, steps up in its own way and still holds its own to this day. They had a very fun Road to WrestleMania where you pick a person and your whole goal is to basically get all the titles and carry them to WrestleMania. And various storylines, and I say storylines in the loosest of manners, come along. At one point, depending on who you are, Vince will come and strip you of the title, and then that's how you're trying to get to WrestleMania. They also had cage matches in this game for the first time, and those were extremely challenging. This was also the first time I got to use those mechanics to play as The Rock and Stone Cold and all the Attitude Era staples. You had Blue Meanie, who was a lot of fun to play as for me. You had Head, the New Age Outlaws, Undertaker, Kane. This was the first time that we ever got to see what was under Kane's mask, and it was a dude who just had half his face burn off. It was all black and charred. I think this game should be revisited by everyone who enjoyed that era of gaming, even now who enjoys the current WWE product. I say go back and spend a week with that game. It holds a lot more fun than you probably remember. The only flaws I would say in this game were the lack of depth somewhat in the Road to WrestleMania. And for its time, though, I would say that when it came out, it was pretty much the best wrestling game that ever existed. And I can't really fault it for anything right off the top of my head, because the only thing No Mercy did was improve upon it. And just because it didn't have some of the things No Mercy had, I can't hate on that. So, if you are a fan of the Attitude Era, if you're a fan of wrestling, if you're a fan of gaming in general, that was the big thing about this game, is it held an appeal, I feel like, for non-wrestling fans to just come in and enjoy the game for what it was, with the grappling system being so easy and so satisfying to play. And you could grab people who you weren't necessarily familiar with on their ring work, but people who had transcended wrestling to become cultural celebrities, like Stone Cold and The Rock, and to an extent The Undertaker. And I loved that they had all of Mick Foley's personalities in there, as well as Shawn Michaels, who at the time had just retired. So it was fun to be able to see him after we had not seen him for a while. You can find the game on eBay for probably $10 to $12 at most. Or check your local retro gaming store if you have one. But this is a game I feel like it's worth sitting down and playing even to this day, even though we're 18 years past its release, 19 years at this point. Go check it out. Well, everyone, that's it for today. I love you. Thank you for listening. I'd like to thank Kevin Lane for editing this. I'd like to thank Dandelion Massacre for their theme song. As always, go to dandelionmassacre.com. I would also like to thank Dan Faughdner, who did our little graphics and the logo and all that. I am forever grateful for that. Follow me on all the social media. I've got a contest coming up very soon for if you rate this and give it 5 stars and leave a review on iTunes. Trust me, you're going to want to keep an eye on that. I'll be announcing it on social media, and then eventually I'll be announcing it on here. But as I said, keep an eye out for that. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff, at Adam S. Messinger. And with that, that's all I can think of at the moment. I will see you all next week. And I'll miss you. Until then.